He set down his glass, looked at the young woman holding an old chessboard, and said loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear, "Sweetheart, why don't you go teach children their little games and leave the thinking to the adults?" Alexander Romano smiled while 300 wealthy strangers laughed at Claire Bennett. He wanted her small. He wanted her ashamed. He had no idea he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Before we go on, if you love stories where the underestimated woman wins, please subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels tonight. Claire Bennett had learned a long time ago that the loudest man in the room was rarely the smartest. She had been 8 years old the first time she understood this, sitting across from her grandfather at a wobbling kitchen table in Brooklyn, watching him talk and talk while she quietly took his queen. 21 years later, standing in a marble ballroom that smelled of expensive perfume and old money, she felt that same steadiness rise up inside her chest. She looked at Alexander Romano and she did not look away. "You're right," she said, and her voice was calm. "Chess is just a little game." The crowd chuckled again, this time at her, thinking she had surrendered. Alexander's smile widened. He liked women who backed down. It confirmed everything he already believed about the world. But Claire wasn't finished. "It's a little game," she said, "the same way a scalpel is a little knife, small in the hand, enormous in what it can do." She set her chessboard down on the nearest cocktail table, and the sound of the wood meeting glass was somehow louder than all the laughter. "Would you like to play, Mr. Romano, or do you only insult women who can't fight back?" The laughter died. Something shifted in the room, a change in the air that everybody felt but nobody could name. Alexander Romano was not a man people challenged. He was a man people apologized to, quickly and often, before they even understood what they had done wrong. Grown men with billions of dollars grew nervous when he entered an elevator. Politicians returned his calls within minutes. And here was a chess teacher from Brooklyn, in a dress she had clearly borrowed, asking him if he was a coward. He should have been furious. Instead, for reasons he could not explain to himself, he was interested. "You have a mouth on you," he said. "I have a brain," Claire answered. "The mouth just delivers the messages." A few nervous laughs scattered across the room, and this time they were not at her expense. Alexander heard them. He noticed them. He was a man who noticed everything, who had survived 39 years in a world where a single missed detail could get you killed, and he did not like being laughed near, even a little. But he also could not remember the last time someone had spoken to him that way and lived to finish the sentence. Let me tell you a little about Claire Bennett, so you understand exactly who was standing in front of that dangerous man. She was 29 years old. She rented a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, and on cold nights, she could smell the dryer sheets coming up through the floorboards, and she had come to find it comforting instead of annoying, which tells you a great deal about the kind of person she was. She had a way of turning hard things into soft ones, just by refusing to be bitter. She ran a chess program for kids in a neighborhood most of these gala guests had never driven through and never would. Kids whose fathers were gone. Kids who came to her little community center after school because it was warm and safe, and because Miss Claire never once made them feel stupid. She taught them openings and endgames, yes, but really she was teaching them something else. She was teaching them that they could sit across from a problem that looked bigger than they were and beat it if they stayed calm and thought clearly and refused to panic. The program was dying. That was the truth she carried into the gala that night like a stone in her shoe. The building's owner had tripled the rent. Her funding had dried up. In 6 weeks, the doors would close, and 40 children would lose the one place in the world that had ever told them they were smart. She had come to the charity gala hoping to find a donor. She had scraped together enough for a ticket, worn her sister's dress, and spent the whole night trying to catch the eye of anyone who might care about kids they would never meet. And then Alexander Romano had walked in, and the whole room had turned toward him like flowers turning toward a very cold sun. And he had watched her explaining a chess opening to a bored couple, and he had decided to make her the entertainment for the evening. He had no idea what he had walked into. "All right," Alexander said, unbuttoning his suit jacket in a slow, deliberate way that he knew made people watch him. "Let's play your little game. And since you're so confident, let's make it worth your while. If you win, I'll write a check to that program of yours. A real check, the kind that changes things." Claire's heart jumped, but she kept her face perfectly still. She had a very good poker face. You had to, teaching chess to clever children who watched your eyes for tells. "How much?" she asked. The crowd gasped a little at her boldness. "You did not ask Alexander Romano how much. You said thank you." He named a number. It was more money than Claire's program had seen in its entire 10 years of existence. It was enough to buy the building outright. It was enough to hire 2 more teachers, to run tournaments, to feed those kids on the nights when they came to her hungry and pretended they weren't. It was enough to change 40 lives, and then hundreds more after them. The room went quiet, waiting for her to break down and thank him, to become small and grateful, exactly the way he wanted her to be. Claire looked at the number hanging in the air, and then she looked at the man who had offered it as a joke, and she made a decision that would change the course of her entire life. "And when I win," she said, "you're going to do more than write a check. You're going to stand up in front of all these people and admit you were wrong about me." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman actually gasped out loud. Alexander's jaw tightened. For just a moment, the interest in his eyes flickered into something colder, something that reminded everyone watching exactly what kind of man he really was underneath the tailored suit. The kind of man you did not corner. The kind of man who made problems disappear. Then he laughed. It was a short, surprised sound, and it was real, and it startled him more than it startled anyone else in the room. "You've got yourself a deal, teacher," he said, "but I promise you, you're going to regret using that mouth of yours in about 15 minutes. "We'll see," said Claire. "Have a seat." They sat. Someone brought a small table into the center of the ballroom, and the crowd formed a thick ring around them, 5 and 6 people deep, everyone jostling to see the great Alexander Romano crush the little chess teacher from Brooklyn. Phones came out. This was going to be a story people told for weeks. The night Romano put the girl in her place, Claire set up the board with hands that did not shake. She had set up this board 10,000 times. She had set it up in cold community centers and hot summer parks, and once in a hospital room beside a boy who was very sick and wanted to play one more game. Her hands knew this. Her hands were home. "You can be white," she said. "First move, I insist." "Giving me the advantage?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "That's a mistake." "It's a courtesy," said Claire. "There's a difference. You'll learn it tonight." The crowd murmured. Oh, they were enjoying this now. Even the people who feared Alexander Romano, even the ones who owed him money and favors and things they could never speak about, found something delicious in watching a woman refuse to be afraid of him. Alexander moved his pawn, Claire moved hers, and the game began. Now I want to slow down here, because what happened over the next few minutes was not really about chess. It was about 2 people who saw the world in completely opposite ways, sitting down across from each other for the first time. Alexander Romano played the way he lived. He attacked. He pushed. He came at Claire's position hard and fast, throwing his pieces forward, trying to overwhelm her, trying to make her panic and make a mistake. It was exactly how he ran his companies, exactly how he ran his other business, the one people only whispered about. Pressure, intimidation, force. He had never in his life met a problem he couldn't bully into submission. And Claire? Claire did nothing. That was what confused him. That was what got under his skin. She wasn't fighting back. She was just quietly, calmly, moving her pieces into position and letting him come. Every time he pushed, she gave a little ground, so smoothly that it looked like she was losing. To the crowd, it looked like she was losing. People started to smile. People started to whisper, "Here it comes." "You're playing scared," Alexander said, taking one of her pawns. "I thought you had a brain." "I'm listening," said Claire, and moved a knight. "Listening to what? The board doesn't talk." "You do," she said. "Every move you make tells me exactly who you are." He didn't like that. Something in his chest went tight, the way it did when someone got too close to something true. He pushed harder. He took another pawn. He was winning material now, gobbling up her pieces, and the crowd was practically vibrating with anticipation. and Alexander leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who had never lost anything that mattered. "And who am I, teacher?" he asked, mocking. "Since you're reading me so well." Claire looked up from the board. She looked right into his eyes, and for a strange, suspended moment, the whole loud room seemed to go quiet, and it was just the two of them. "You're a man who thinks winning is the same as being right," she said softly. "You've probably never lost a single time in your whole life, and that's the saddest thing I've heard all night, because a man who never loses never learns anything. He just gets more and more sure of himself, all the way to the bottom." Alexander stared at her. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody had talked to him like that in 12 years. Not since the last man foolish enough to try had ended up in a situation Alexander did not like to think about at parties. And this woman had said it not with hatred, not with fear, but with something that looked almost like kindness, like she felt sorry for him, like she was trying to warn him. "Make your move," he said, and his voice had lost its playful edge. "I already did," said Claire. 3 moves ago, you just didn't see it." The crowd laughed nervously. Alexander looked down at the board, and for the first time all night, a small cold feeling crawled up the back of his neck. He studied the position. He was up material. He had taken her pawns. He had pushed her back. He was in control, the same way he was always in control. But something was wrong, something about the shape of the board. Her pieces, the ones he had been ignoring while he feasted on her pawns, were sitting in strange, quiet places, not attacking, not defending, just waiting. Waiting for what? He moved, cautiously now. Claire moved instantly, like she'd been expecting exactly that. And the way she set the piece down, soft and certain, made the cold feeling on his neck spread down into his stomach. "You've been letting me win," he said slowly. "I've been letting you believe you were winning," Claire corrected. "It's not the same thing. But you don't know the difference, do you? Because in your whole life, nobody's ever let you lose long enough to learn it." The room was dead silent now. Every phone was recording. Every wealthy guest, every man who owed Alexander Romano his career, every woman who had been warned to stay away from him, watched with their mouths slightly open because they could feel it now, all of them. Something was happening. Something impossible. Alexander Romano was in trouble. He looked at the board, and he finally, truly looked at it, the way he should have from the start, and his mind, which was a very fast and very dangerous mind, raced through the position and understood. She had him. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. But every escape he found led into another trap. Every move he wanted to make walked him deeper into a net she had been quietly weaving since the very first move, while he was busy feeling powerful. "That's not possible," he said, and it came out quieter than he meant it to. "It's chess," said Claire gently. "It's always possible. That's the beautiful thing about it. It doesn't care how much money you have. It doesn't care who's afraid of you. The board tells the truth. The board doesn't lie." Alexander made a move. It was a good move. It was the best move on the board. It wasn't enough. Claire answered it in 1 second. He made another. Desperate now. A little pale. She answered that too. And the crowd, the rich and powerful crowd that had gathered to watch a man humiliate a woman, began, one by one, to realize they were watching the exact opposite. And a strange electric energy ran through the ballroom. The feeling you get when the impossible is happening right in front of you and you know you'll remember it for the rest of your life. "Check," said Claire. Alexander moved his king. "Check," said Claire again. He moved it again into the only square left. And Claire Bennett, chess teacher from Brooklyn, 29 years old, in her sister's borrowed dress, reached out and moved a single piece across the board and set it down with a soft and final click, and said the word that Alexander Romano had not heard in 12 years. Checkmate. 12 moves. The whole thing had taken 12 moves. For a moment, nobody in the entire ballroom made a sound. 300 people held their breath. The band had stopped playing somewhere in the middle without anyone noticing. There was just the silence, thick and total, and the sight of the great and terrible Alexander Romano staring down at a chessboard where his king sat trapped, defeated, checkmated by a woman he had called sweetheart and told to go play with children. And then someone clapped. It was one person at first, somewhere in the back, and it was quickly followed by another, and within seconds the entire ballroom erupted into applause so loud it shook the crystal in the chandeliers. People were on their feet. People were cheering. People who had spent their whole lives being polite and careful around Alexander Romano were clapping for the woman who had beaten him. And the beautiful, dangerous truth was that they could not help themselves. Claire did not gloat. She simply sat back and folded her hands and waited, watching Alexander's face with those calm, clear eyes. And this, right here, is where the story truly begins. Because what Alexander Romano did next, no one in that room could have predicted. Not the people who feared him, not the people who loved him, not even Claire, who thought she had read him so well. Alexander did not get angry. He did not stand up and storm out. He did not have someone quietly removed. He did not do any of the cold, frightening things that people expected from a man like him when he was made to look foolish in front of the most important people in New York. Instead, Alexander Romano stared at the board for a long, long moment, and then he began to laugh. Not a cruel laugh, not a bitter one. A real, deep, astonished laugh. The laugh of a man who has just been surprised by life for the first time in longer than he can remember. He put his head back and he laughed, and the crowd fell silent again, because this was almost more frightening than anger would have been. This was something nobody understood. 12 moves, Alexander said, shaking his head. You beat me in 12 moves. He looked at Claire, and there was something in his eyes now that had not been there before. Something raw, something almost hungry. Do you have any idea, he said quietly, how long it's been since anyone told me the truth? Claire did not answer. She sensed that the question was not really for her. Alexander stood up. He buttoned his jacket. And then, to the shock of everyone watching, he reached into his coat and he took out a checkbook and he wrote a check right there, standing up, using the chess table as a desk. He wrote the number he had promised. And then he paused, and he added another number to it, doubling it, and he tore the check out and held it across the board to Claire. You won, he said. A deal's a deal. This is for your program. Claire took the check with steady hands, though her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might be able to hear it. She looked at the number. Her program was saved. The building was saved. Those 40 children, and the hundreds who would come after them, were saved. She had walked into this gala with a stone in her shoe and a dying dream, and she was going to walk out having changed everything. Thank you, she said. And for the first time all night, her voice trembled just slightly, because it was one thing to be brave and quite another to have that bravery actually work. Don't thank me, said Alexander. You earned it. Every dollar. He was still standing. He had not sat back down, and the crowd was still watching, and the tension in the room had a different quality now, a waiting quality, like everyone could sense there was one more thing coming. There was. I owe you an admission, Alexander said, and he raised his voice so the whole ballroom could hear him, because he was a man who did everything in front of an audience. I said I was wrong about you, so here it is. He looked around the room at all the powerful people who had come to watch him win. I was wrong about her, he said. I walked in here and I saw a woman with an old chessboard, and I thought I knew everything about her. I thought she was nothing, and she just beat me in 12 moves in front of every one of you. He turned back to Claire. I was wrong, and I don't say that often. In fact, I'm fairly sure I've never said it before in my life. The crowd was silent, spellbound. And then Alexander Romano did the thing that would send a shockwave through New York society, the thing that would be whispered about in boardrooms and on street corners for weeks to come, the thing that Claire Bennett would replay in her mind 1,000 times, trying to understand. He looked at this woman he had known for less than 20 minutes, this chess teacher from Brooklyn who had humiliated him and told him the truth about himself and shown no fear at all, and he said, in a clear and steady voice that carried to every corner of the ballroom, "Marry me." The room exploded. There was no other word for it. 300 people gasped and shouted and cried out all at once, a wave of pure disbelief. And somewhere a woman dropped a glass and it shattered on the marble floor, and nobody even turned to look, because everyone was staring at Alexander Romano, who had just proposed marriage to a stranger in the middle of a charity gala. Claire's mouth fell open. For the first time all night, the calm chess teacher was completely, utterly speechless. "What?" she managed. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," said Alexander. His face was perfectly serious now. The laughter was gone. Whatever this was, he meant it. "Marry me." "You're out of your mind," Claire said, and a nervous laugh escaped her, because surely this was a joke, some final cruel twist, some way to make the crowd laugh at her after all. "We just met. You called me sweetheart 20 minutes ago. You told me to go play with children." "And then you taught me something no one's managed to teach me in 12 years, Alexander said. "I don't waste time when I see something I want, and I've never in my life seen anything like you." "This is insane." "Maybe," he agreed. "But look around this room, Claire Bennett. Look at all these people who've never once told me no. Never once told me I was wrong. Never once looked me in the eye without calculating what I could do for them or to them." His voice dropped lower, so that only she could really hear it, though the whole room strained to listen. "You did all 3 in 20 minutes. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Do you have any idea what I'd give for someone who isn't afraid of me?" Claire stared at him. And here is the thing she could not have known, the thing that made this moment so much more dangerous than it appeared. She thought she was looking at an eccentric billionaire making a wild, romantic gesture. She thought this was a strange, flattering, ridiculous thing that she would say no to, and then go home and tell her sister about over coffee and laugh and treasure for the rest of her life. She did not know who Alexander Romano truly was. She did not know that behind the companies and the charity galas and the tailored suits, there was another Alexander, one who controlled things far more dangerous than businesses. She did not know that the powerful people in that room were not just afraid of his money. She did not know why the mayor had personally shaken his hand, or why 2 men in dark suits stood by the doors watching everything, or why a proposal from Alexander Romano was not the kind of thing you could simply laugh off and forget. She did not know that by walking into this gala, by sitting down at that chessboard, by refusing to be afraid, she had already stepped through a door into a world she could not yet imagine, a world of secrets and shadows and danger, a world where love could get you killed and where the wrong marriage could change not just your life, but whether you lived at all. She knew none of that yet. All she knew, standing there in the roaring ballroom with a check in her hand that would save 40 children and a proposal ringing in her ears that made no sense at all, was that Alexander Romano was looking at her like she was the only real thing he had ever seen, and that for all his money and all his power, there was something in his eyes that she recognized, because she had seen it 100 times in the eyes of the lonely children who came to her chess program. She saw a person who did not believe they deserved anything good, and Claire Bennett had never in her life been able to walk away from that. "I'm not going to marry you," she said, but her voice was gentler now, and Alexander, who read people for a living, heard the door that was still, just barely, open. "I don't even know you." "Then get to know me," he said. "Have dinner with me tomorrow, one dinner. If you still think I'm out of my mind, you keep the check, we never see each other again, and you go save your kids and forget I ever existed." He held out his hand. "But I don't think you'll want to forget, because I saw your face just now, when you beat me. You've been fighting your whole life, Claire Bennett, fighting to keep that program alive, fighting to prove people wrong. Aren't you tired of fighting alone?" And that, more than anything, was the thing that got her, because she was tired. God, she was tired. She had been carrying that program on her back for 10 years, alone, in the cold, smelling of dryer sheets and running on coffee and pure stubbornness. And no one had ever once offered to help her carry it. No one had ever once looked at her the way this dangerous stranger was looking at her now. She should have said no. Everything sensible in her was screaming at her to say no, to take the check and run, to get as far away from Alexander Romano as she could and never look back. Instead, Claire Bennett looked at the man everyone in New York feared, the man she had just beaten in 12 moves, and she heard herself say the 4 words that would change everything, that would pull her out of her small, safe life and into a world of danger and secrets, and a kind of love neither of them believed they deserved. "One dinner," she said. "That's all." Alexander Romano smiled. And it was not the cold, superior smile he had worn when he walked into that ballroom. It was something new, something that even his oldest associates, watching from the edges of the crowd, had never seen on his face before, and it frightened them far more than his anger ever could, because a man like Alexander Romano was dangerous when he was angry. But a man like Alexander Romano, with something to lose, with something he wanted, with a woman who wasn't afraid of him, was dangerous in a way that could burn down the whole world. And across the ballroom, standing very still by the door, one of those men in dark suits took out his phone, and he made a call, and he said 3 quiet words to the person on the other end. "We have a problem." The 3 quiet words traveled through the phone and into the ear of a man Claire Bennett had never met, a man who would soon become one of the most important people in her life, whether she wanted him or not. And that man listened, and then he said only, "Watch her, don't touch her, I want to know everything," and hung up. But Claire knew none of this. Claire was still standing in the middle of the ballroom, holding a check that would save her life's work, feeling the eyes of 300 wealthy strangers on her, and trying to understand how in the span of 20 minutes she had gone from a woman nobody noticed to a woman who had just agreed to have dinner with the most feared man in New York City. "I need to sit down," she said. "Then sit," said Alexander. "Sit right here. Finish your drink. Catch your breath. I have a habit of doing that to people." Beating them at chess? Turning their whole night upside down? He pulled out a chair for her, and the gesture was so ordinary, so unexpectedly gentle from a man who moments ago had been laughing like a lion, that Claire actually sat. The crowd, sensing that the show was over, began to break apart into smaller clusters, but she could feel them still watching, still whispering, still holding up their phones. She had become, in a single evening, the most interesting thing in the room. She did not like it. She had spent her whole life being invisible, and she had learned to use invisibility like a tool, and now it was gone. "They're staring at me," she said. "They're staring at us," Alexander corrected. "There's a difference. You get used to it." "I don't want to get used to it." "No," he said, studying her. "I don't suppose you do. That's part of why I asked you to marry me." Claire put down her glass a little too hard. "Please stop saying that." "Which part? The marrying or the asking?" "Both. All of it. You can't just say that to a person you met 20 minutes ago." "I can say whatever I want," Alexander said, and there was no arrogance in it, just a flat and slightly weary statement of fact, as if he were describing the weather. "That's the problem, Claire. That's exactly the problem. For 12 years I've been able to say whatever I want, take whatever I want, do whatever I want, and no one has ever once told me no." He leaned forward. And he leaned titi. "And then a chess teacher from Brooklyn beats me in 12 moves and tells me I'm a man who thinks winning is the same as being right. You have no idea what that felt like." "Humiliating, I'd imagine," Claire said. "That's just it." Alexander's voice dropped. "It didn't feel humiliating. It felt like the first honest thing that's happened to me in years." There was a moment then where the noise of the ballroom seemed to fade, and Claire looked at this dangerous stranger and saw, just for an instant, the loneliness sitting behind his eyes like a stone at the bottom of a well. She had spent her whole career learning to see that particular loneliness. It lived in the children who came to her program, the ones who had been let down so many times that they had stopped expecting anything at all, the ones who flinched when you praised them because kindness felt like a trap. She had never expected to see it in a billionaire. "Who hurt you?" she asked. The question came out before she could stop it. Alexander went very still. For a second she thought she had gone too far, that she had cracked something open that should have stayed closed, and she saw a shadow move across his face, and the two men in dark suits by the door shifted their weight almost imperceptibly, the way guard dogs do when they sense their master's mood change. Then Alexander smiled, but it was a smaller, tighter smile than before. "Tomorrow," he said. "Dinner. You can ask me anything you want, and I'll answer, which is something I never do. Consider it your prize for beating me." He stood and buttoned his jacket. "My driver will pick you up at 7. Wear whatever you like. I don't care about the dress. I care about the mind." He paused. "That's a first for me too, if I'm being honest." And then he was gone, moving through the crowd like a blade through water, people parting for him without even seeming to notice they were doing it. And Claire sat alone at the little table with a check in her hand and the strangest feeling in her chest. The feeling that she had just made a decision she could not take back. She looked down at the chessboard, still set up with the pieces frozen in the position of Alexander's defeat, his king lying where she had toppled it, and she thought, with a small cold prickle of something that was not quite fear and not quite excitement, that she had beaten him too easily. A man like that did not lose by accident. A man like that did not propose by accident either. She just didn't yet understand what the game really was. Claire went home that night to her apartment above the laundromat, and she did not sleep. She sat at her own kitchen table, the same wobbling table her grandfather had taught her on, and she stared at the check, and she called her sister Dana at 2 in the morning, even though Dana had work in the morning, because she had to tell someone or she was going to lose her mind. "You did what?" Dana said, her voice thick with sleep and then suddenly very awake. "I beat him at chess, and he gave me the money. Dana, it's all of it. The building, the teachers, everything. The program is saved." "Claire, that's incredible. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you, but back up, back way up. You said he asked you something." Claire closed her eyes. "He asked me to marry him." There was a long silence on the phone. "Is this a prank?" Dana said finally. "Are you being pranked? Am I being pranked?" "I wish I was." He was completely serious, in front of the whole room. "He proposed to me, Dana, and then he asked me to dinner tomorrow, and I said yes." "You said yes? To dinner, just dinner." "Claire." Dana's voice went very careful, very quiet, the voice she used when she was about to say something Claire wasn't going to like. "Do you know who Alexander Romano is?" "A rich businessman." "No." A pause. "Claire, listen to me. Marcus's cousin worked for one of his companies for a while, and the things Marcus told me, the things that man is supposed to be involved in." Dana lowered her voice even further, as if someone might be listening, and Claire felt the hairs on her arms stand up. "He's not just a businessman. People say he's Claire. They say he runs things, bad things, the kind of things you don't come back from. People who cross him disappear. That's not a rumor. That's Marcus's cousin quitting a 6-figure job and refusing to say why and moving to Arizona." Claire's mouth went dry. "That's just talk. People say things about rich men." "Maybe," Dana said, "but you're going to dinner with him tomorrow, and I need you to promise me you'll be careful. I need you to promise me that if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you'll get out of there. Because I have a bad feeling about this, Claire. I have a really bad feeling." Claire looked at the check on her table, the check that meant 40 children would not lose the only safe place they had ever known, and she thought about the loneliness she had seen behind Alexander Romano's eyes, and she thought about how tired she was of fighting alone. "I promise," she said. She would break that promise before the week was out, but she didn't know that yet. The next evening, at 7 o'clock exactly, a black car pulled up outside the laundromat, and Claire came down the stairs in the nicest dress she owned, which was still not very nice, and she got in, and the driver said nothing the entire way, and she watched the city slide by outside the window and tried to slow her racing heart. Alexander was waiting for her at a restaurant that had no sign out front, the kind of place you had to know about, the kind of place where the other diners were the sort of people whose faces you half recognized from newspapers and could not quite place. He stood when she came in. He actually stood. "You came," he said, and there was something almost boyish in it, something surprised, as if a part of him had genuinely expected her not to. "I said I would." People say a lot of things. "I'm not people," said Claire, and she sat down across from him, and she folded her hands, and she looked at him with those calm, clear eyes. You said I could ask you anything, so I'm going to. And you said you'd answer honestly, so you will. That's the deal. That's the deal. Good. She took a breath. Are you a criminal? The question landed on the table between them like a dropped knife. To Alexander's credit, he did not flinch, and he did not laugh it off, and he did not lie. He looked at her for a long moment, and Claire saw something move behind his eyes, some rapid calculation, some weighing of options. And then she saw him decide, and what he decided surprised her more than anything that had happened since she'd walked into the gala. He decided to tell her the truth. Yes, he said. Just that. One word. No excuses, no softening, no elaborate justification. Yes. Claire's stomach dropped. She had expected him to deny it. She had wanted him to deny it so that she could believe Dana was wrong, and the rumors were just rumors, and this dangerous, fascinating man was only dangerous the way all powerful men are dangerous. But he hadn't denied it. He had looked her in the eye and said yes. How bad? She asked. Her voice was steadier than she felt. Bad enough that most people at this table have killed someone, Alexander said quietly. Bad enough that half the men in this room answer to me. Bad enough that when I told you last night I could say whatever I want and no one tells me no, I meant it in ways you don't want to fully understand. He turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth. You asked me who hurt me. My father hurt me. My father built the thing I now run, and he built it with his hands. And he taught me the trade the way other fathers teach their sons to fish. I was 9 years old the first time I understood what my family really was. I've never known anything else. This is the world I was born into, Claire. I didn't choose it any more than you chose to be born in Brooklyn. Claire sat very still. Every sensible instinct in her body was telling her to stand up and walk out of that restaurant and never look back. This was exactly the anything feels wrong moment Dana had made her promise to run from. This was the door, right here, still open behind her. She did not stand up. Why are you telling me this? She asked instead. You could have lied. It would have been easy. I would never have known. Because you'd have known eventually, Alexander said, and because for once in my life, I don't want to build something on a lie. He leaned forward. I meant what I said last night, Claire. I need a wife. Not because I'm lonely, though God knows I am. My family is pressuring me. In my world, a man my age without a wife looks weak, looks unstable, looks like a target. There are people who would move against me the moment they smell weakness. I need a wife who's respectable, who's intelligent, who can stand beside me at events and hold her own with the sharks I do business with, and who, most importantly, isn't afraid of me. He paused. I've met 100 women who wanted my money. I've never met one who beat me at chess and then asked me who hurt me. Do you understand how that landed? So this is business, Claire said slowly. The proposal, it's a transaction. Yes, Alexander said, and again that brutal honesty. It's a transaction. I'm not going to insult you by pretending I fell in love with you across a chessboard. I don't believe in that, and I don't think you do either. But I'm offering you a real deal, Claire, and I want you to hear all of it before you say no. He signaled, and a waiter set down a leather folder in front of her, and she opened it, and inside was a single sheet of paper, and she began to read. It was a contract. A marriage contract. 1 year. That was the term. 1 year at the end of which either party could walk away, clean, no strings. In exchange for that year, for her presence at his side, for her playing the role of his respectable wife, Alexander Romano would give her, and here Claire had to read the number 3 times to be sure she was reading it right, would give her a sum of money so large that it did not save her chess program. It built an empire out of it. It was enough to open programs in every borough. Enough to reach not 40 children but 4,000. Enough to fund scholarships, tournaments, buildings, teachers, meals, everything she had ever dreamed of doing lying awake at night in her apartment above the laundromat and telling herself was impossible. It was every door she had ever seen closed to those kids, thrown open all at once. Claire's hands were shaking now. She could not make them stop. You did this on purpose, she whispered. You looked into my program. You found out exactly what I want most in the world, and you put it on the table. Of course I did, said Alexander. I always know what someone wants most. It's how I win." He tilted his head. "But here's the difference, Claire, and I want you to really hear it. Everyone else, I use what they want to control them. You, I'm putting it on the table and letting you decide with your eyes open. That's not nothing. In my world, that's practically a love letter." And despite everything, despite the fear and the contract and the confession of murder that hung in the air between them, Claire almost laughed. "You're a terrible man," she said. "I'm a very bad man," Alexander agreed. "But I'm an honest one, at least with you. And I think that has to count for something." Claire looked down at the contract. She looked at the number. She thought about the children. She thought about Marcus's cousin, who had quit a 6-figure job and moved to Arizona and refused to say why. She thought about her sister's voice on the phone, "Get out of there." And she thought about the loneliness behind this man's eyes. And she thought about how strange it was that the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to her did not feel like danger. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing that some part of her wanted to jump. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Alexander went very still, and something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like hope, quickly hidden. "Name them." "First." Claire held up one finger, and she was surprised at how steady her voice had become. "You will never control me. I'm not a decoration. I'm not a prop you take out at parties and put back in a box. I keep my program. I keep my life. I keep my mind. You don't get to tell me what to do." "Agreed." "Second, you never lie to me. Not once. Not about anything. I don't care how ugly the truth is. The moment you lie to me, the deal is over, and I walk, and I don't care what's in the contract." Alexander was quiet for a moment. "That's a hard one," he said. "In my world, everyone lies. It's how we survive." "I'm not your world. I'm the one honest thing you said you wanted. So give me honesty or give me nothing." Slowly, Alexander nodded. "Agreed," he said. "It'll cost me, but agreed." "Third." And here Claire's voice dropped, and she looked at him very steadily, because this was the one that mattered most. "If I ever feel unsafe, truly unsafe, I can walk away, no matter what, no matter when. You said this is a transaction. Well, in my transactions, I keep the right to leave a table that's turned dangerous. If I say I'm out, and you let me go. You don't stop me. You don't send those men by the door after me. You let me walk." The silence that followed was the longest yet. Alexander looked at her, and Claire saw him understand exactly what she was really asking, which was not about the contract at all. She was asking whether he was the kind of man who let people go, or the kind of man people disappeared from. She was asking whether the rumors were true. She was asking him to promise her, a stranger, a woman he had known for one day, something he had probably never promised anyone in his life. She was asking him to promise not to be a monster. "You have my word," Alexander said, and his voice was rough. "If you ever want out, truly out, you're out. I'll walk you to the door myself." He held her gaze. "I've never given my word on anything that easily, but I'm giving it to you now." Claire believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. And she would spend the next several months wondering whether that belief was the smartest or the most foolish thing she had ever done. "Then," she said, and she picked up the pen, and her hand hovered over the line for one last moment, one last chance to stand up and walk out and go back to her small, safe life above the laundromat. "I have one more condition." "Anything." "When this is over," Claire said. "When the year is up, whatever happens between us, whether we hate each other or whatever. You never touch those kids. The program is mine. It doesn't belong to you. It's not leverage. It's not a bargaining chip. It's not something you can take back if you're angry. Whatever happens to me, those kids are safe. Forever. Swear it. Swear." And Alexander Romano, feared throughout New York, master of a criminal empire, a man who by his own admission had done things Claire could not imagine, looked at this woman who, even now, even with a fortune in front of her, was thinking about the children instead of herself, and something in his chest cracked open in a way it had not cracked in 30 years. "I swear it," he said quietly. "On my life. Those kids are safe forever. You have my word." Claire signed her name. And just like that, in a restaurant with no sign, in front of a man half the city feared, Claire Bennett changed the entire course of her life. She did not know that at that exact moment, across the city, the man who had made the phone call the night before, the man who had said we have a problem, was sitting in a dark office, looking at a photograph of Claire's face and speaking to someone even more powerful than Alexander. "He's serious about her," the man said into the phone. "He signed a contract, a real one." The voice on the other end was old and cold and patient. "Then she's useful," it said. "Every man has a weakness, and Alexander has just handed us his. Watch her, learn her, and when the time comes, we'll use her to take everything he has." The man hung up. He looked at the photograph of Claire one more time, at her calm eyes and her borrowed dress, and he almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Claire, of course, knew nothing of this. Claire was walking out of the restaurant on Alexander's arm into a night that felt suddenly enormous and full of possibility, feeling for the first time in 10 years like maybe, just maybe, she did not have to carry everything alone. "So," Alexander said as they reached the car. "Mrs. Romano?" "Don't," Claire said. "We're not married yet, and when we are, I'm keeping my own name." "Of course you are." He was almost smiling. "I'd expect nothing less. But you should know, the wedding needs to happen quickly. My family wants to meet you. And Claire, I need to prepare you. They are not going to be kind." "I teach chess to 8-year-olds who bite," said Claire. "I think I can handle your family." Alexander laughed, that real, astonished laugh, the one that still seemed to surprise him every time it came out. "You have no idea what you're walking into," he said. He was right. The wedding happened 11 days later, small and fast and strange, in a room full of people Claire didn't know, half of whom looked at her like she was a stain on the carpet. She wore a dress Alexander's people had chosen over her objections, and she signed papers, and she said words, and a man she had known for less than 2 weeks slid a ring onto her finger that was worth more than her entire life, and she smiled for cameras she didn't want, and she felt, the whole time, like she was watching herself from somewhere far away. But it was the dinner 3 days after the wedding that Claire would remember as the moment she truly understood what she had married into. Alexander's family gathered at an enormous house that felt more like a fortress than a home, and Claire sat at a long table surrounded by Romanos, and she felt every single pair of eyes on her, weighing her, measuring her, deciding what she was worth. At the head of the table sat Alexander's grandmother. Her name was Vittoria Romano, and she was 83 years old, and she was, Claire would learn, the true power behind the entire family, the one whose word was final, the one even Alexander deferred to. She was tiny and elegant and terrifying, and when she looked at Claire, Claire felt like a mouse being studied by something with very old, very patient eyes. "So," Vittoria said, and the whole table went silent. "This is the chess teacher." "Yes, Nonna," said Alexander. "The one who beat you in front of 300 people." 12 moves, said Alexander, and there was, incredibly, a note of pride in it. Vittoria did not smile. She looked at Claire for a long, long moment, and Claire made herself look back, because she had promised herself the day she signed that contract that she would never let these people see her afraid. "Come here, girl," Vittoria said. "Sit by me." The whole table seemed to hold its breath. Claire understood somehow that this was a test and that a great deal depended on how she passed it, and she stood and she walked the length of that long table under the eyes of the entire Romano family, and she sat down beside the most dangerous woman in the room. "They tell me," Vittoria said quietly, so only Claire could hear, "that you made my grandson say he was wrong, in public, in front of everyone." "I did," said Claire. "Do you know," Vittoria said, "that no one has made that boy admit he was wrong since he was 6 years old?" "I'm not surprised," Claire said. "He's very stubborn." And then something happened that made every Romano at that table sit up in shock. Vittoria Romano laughed. It was a dry, cracked, rusty sound, the sound of a laugh that had not been used in a very long time. And the whole family stared, because their terrifying matriarch, who had buried 2 husbands and outlived every enemy she had ever made, was laughing at something the chess teacher had said. "Stubborn," Vittoria repeated, still chuckling. "Yes, he gets that from me." She patted Claire's hand with one thin, ringed hand, and her touch was surprisingly warm. "I like you, girl. I don't know if that's good for you or bad for you. In this family, being liked by me is a dangerous thing." Her eyes sharpened. "But understand me. I like you today. If you hurt my grandson, if you play him for a fool, if you turn out to be one more woman who wanted his money, I will stop liking you very, very quickly. And you do not want to see what happens when I stop liking someone. Do we understand each other?" Claire looked into those ancient, patient eyes, and she understood completely. "We understand each other," she said. "But I should tell you something, Mrs. Romano. I didn't marry your grandson for his money. The money's going to children who've never had anything. Every dollar. And I didn't marry him because I'm afraid of him either. I married him because I looked at him across a chessboard and I saw the loneliest man I've ever met, and I've spent my whole life not being able to walk away from lonely people. That's my weakness, not money. People." The table was silent. Vittoria stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in the old woman's face, something complicated and unreadable. And when she finally spoke, her voice was very soft. "Then God help you, child," she said, "because you married into the loneliest family in New York, and you're going to try to save all of us, aren't you? I can see it in your face. You're going to try to save every single one of us." She shook her head slowly. "You have no idea what that's going to cost you." And down at the other end of the table, watching his new wife charm the one person he had been terrified she would fail with, Alexander Romano felt something he had not felt in 12 years, something warm and dangerous and completely unfamiliar, and he did not yet have a name for it, but his grandmother did. Vittoria had seen that look on a man's face exactly once before, decades ago, on the face of her own husband in the years before the violence took him. She recognized it instantly, and as she watched her grandson watch his wife, the old woman's joy curdled slowly into fear, because she knew, with the terrible certainty of someone who had lived a long time in a dangerous world, exactly what that look meant. It meant Alexander had found something he could lose. And in the Romano family, the things you loved were always the first things your enemies came for. Vittoria's hand tightened around her wine glass, and she looked down the table at the faces of her family, and she wondered, not for the first time, which of them was already whispering to the people who wanted them all dead. Because someone was. She had felt it for months now, a coldness in the house, a sense of being watched, of plans being made in rooms she wasn't in. And now there was Claire. Bright, brave, foolish Claire, who had just announced to a table full of criminals that her weakness was people, that she wanted to save all of them, that she was not afraid. "Eat something, child," Vittoria said quietly, pushing a plate toward Claire. "You're going to need your strength." Claire ate. She had no idea that 3 seats down, a man she had smiled at politely not 10 minutes ago, a man who had kissed her cheek and welcomed her to the family, had already sold them all out. She had no idea that her face was, at that very moment, sitting in a folder on a desk across the city, beneath a single typed word that would decide her fate. The word was leverage. The word was leverage, and it would be 6 weeks before Claire learned it existed, 6 weeks in which she built a life she never expected inside the walls of a world she was never meant to survive. The first thing she did with Alexander's money was save the program. She did it in a single afternoon. She walked into the office of the building's owner, the man who had tripled her rent to force her out, and she bought the building. Not rented. Bought. She watched his face change from smug to stunned as her lawyer slid the papers across the desk, and she thought about all the nights she had lain awake terrified of that man and his rent, and she felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 10 years. Then she got to work. By the end of the first month, there were chess programs in 3 boroughs. By the end of the second, There were 5. She hired teachers, real ones, and paid them real salaries. She bought hundreds of chessboards and clocks and books. She organized the first tournament any of these kids had ever played in, and she watched a 9-year-old boy named Elijah, a boy who had been so quiet when he first came to her that she had worried he never spoke at all, win his very first game and jump up from the table with his fists in the air, screaming with joy, and Claire had to turn away so the other children wouldn't see her cry. This was what the money was for. This was worth everything. This was worth marrying a monster. And the strange thing, the thing Claire did not tell her sister, the thing she barely admitted to herself, was that Alexander was turning out to be a very difficult monster to hate. He came to that first tournament. She hadn't asked him to. She hadn't even told him it was happening. But halfway through the day, she looked up, and there he was, standing at the back of the room in a suit that cost more than the building, watching 40 poor children hunched over chessboards with an expression on his face she couldn't read. "You didn't have to come," she said, walking over to him. "I know," said Alexander. "Then why did you?" He was quiet for a moment, watching Elijah set up his pieces for the next round. "When I was a boy," he said finally, "my father took me to places like this, not chess, other things. He wanted me to learn the trade. So from the time I was small, the rooms I sat in were full of dangerous men, and the games I learned were games where losing meant dying." He watched the children. "I never once sat in a room like this, full of kids just learning something, being allowed to be children." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't know rooms like this existed." Claire felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "They exist," she said softly. "There are more of them now, because of you." "Because of you," Alexander corrected. "I just paid for it. You built it." He looked at her, and there was that thing behind his eyes again, that loneliness. But something else now, too. Something warmer, something reaching. "Do you know what I did today, before I came here? I had a meeting with 3 men who would happily put a bullet in me if they thought they could get away with it. I sat across a table from my enemies, and I smiled at them, and they smiled at me, and every single one of us was calculating how to destroy the others." He gestured at the room full of children. "And then I came here, and I watched a little boy win a chess game and jump up and down like he'd won the whole world, and I thought, this is the first honest room I've been in since I married you." "You've been in one other honest room," Claire said, "the night we met." Alexander almost smiled. "So I have." That night, back at the enormous house that Claire was slowly, reluctantly learning to call home, something changed between them. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have looked like anything to an outsider. But Claire found herself sitting up late in the library with Alexander, a chessboard between them, playing game after game and talking, really talking. He beat her that night, for the first time. It took him 4 hours and 11 games, but he finally, on the 12th game, caught her in a trap she didn't see coming, and when he said, "Checkmate," quietly, almost gently, Claire looked up at him in genuine surprise. "You've been studying," she said. "Every night for 6 weeks," Alexander admitted. "I don't like losing, but more than that, I wanted to understand how you think. And the only way to understand how someone thinks is to sit across a board from them over and over until you can feel their mind moving." He reset the pieces. "You think 3 moves ahead of where you let people see. You give ground to take ground. You let your opponent believe he's winning right up until the moment he's already lost." He looked at her. "You didn't just beat me at chess that night, Claire. You showed me your whole soul in 12 moves, and I've been trying to read the rest of it ever since." Claire's breath caught. "That's a very dangerous thing to say to a woman you're only married to for a year," she said. "I know," said Alexander. "I say a lot of dangerous things lately. I didn't used to. You're a bad influence." And they both laughed, and the laughter turned into a silence. And in the silence, something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name. And Claire stood up very quickly and said goodnight, and went to her room and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and thinking, this is not the deal. This was not the deal. But it was becoming the deal anyway. Over the following weeks, Claire began to see the other Alexander, the one the world never saw. She saw him wake at 3 in the morning from nightmares he wouldn't describe. She saw the way he flinched, just slightly, whenever someone raised a hand too quickly near him, a flinch left over from a childhood she was only beginning to understand. She learned that he funded, secretly and anonymously, 12 charities across the city, hospitals and shelters and food banks, and that he would rather die than let anyone know, because in his world, kindness was weakness, and weakness got you killed. "Why do you hide it?" she asked him one night. "The charities, the giving, you could let people know. It would help your image. Because if my enemies knew I cared about something," Alexander said, "they'd burn it down just to hurt me. Everything I love becomes a target, Claire. Everything. That's the first lesson my father taught me, and the only one that ever really mattered. Love is a door you leave open for your enemies to walk through." He looked at her strangely. "It's why I've never let myself love anything, or anyone." And Claire, who was beginning to understand the terrible loneliness of a man who had trained himself not to love because loving was a death sentence, felt her heart break a little for him. She did not yet realize that she had already become the thing he loved. She did not yet realize that the door was already open, and she did not yet realize that his enemies had already found it. The trouble began on a Tuesday. Claire had been married to Alexander for 2 months. She was at one of her chess centers in the Bronx, the newest one, working late, alone except for the janitor, when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She would spend a long time afterward wishing she hadn't. "Mrs. Romano," a voice said. It was calm, pleasant, and something about it made every hair on her body stand up. "Or should I call you Claire? I feel like I know you so well." "Who is this?" "A friend of your husband's," the voice said. "A very old friend. We have some history, Alexander and I. And I've been watching you, Claire. I have to say I'm impressed. The chess, the children, it's all very touching." A pause. "It would be a shame if something happened to it." Claire's blood went cold. "What do you want?" "Right now? Nothing. Right now I just wanted to introduce myself, to let you know I'm here, to let you know I see you." The voice dropped, and all the pleasantness drained out of it, and what was left was pure ice. "Your husband took something from me a long time ago, Claire, something I can never get back, and I've spent 11 years waiting for him to care about something enough that I could take it from him." A soft, terrible laugh. "And then he married a chess teacher who loves poor children. Thank you, Claire. Thank you for giving me exactly what I needed." The line went dead. Claire stood alone in the empty chess center, phone shaking in her hand, and for the first time since she had signed that contract, she was truly, completely afraid. She didn't tell Alexander that night. She told herself it was because she didn't want to worry him. But the truth was more complicated. The truth was that some part of her was afraid of what Alexander would do. She had seen glimpses over the past 2 months of the man beneath the man, the one who ran an empire of violence, and she was not sure she wanted to unleash him. She was not sure what would happen if she did, so she said nothing. That was her mistake. Because 3 days later, the man on the phone stopped introducing himself and started making his point. Claire arrived at her Bronx center on Friday morning to find the front window shattered. Someone had thrown a brick through it in the night. Tied to the brick was a note. The note had 4 words on it. "Nice place. Would be a shame." Claire stood in the cold morning air, looking at the shattered glass and the brick and the note, and she thought about 40 children who would come to this center that afternoon expecting to play chess, and she thought about the calm, pleasant voice on the phone, and she understood, with a sick certainty, that she had walked into something far bigger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She called Alexander. He was there in 19 minutes. She had never seen him move so fast. He came through the door and crossed the room to her and took her by the shoulders and looked her over like he was checking for wounds. And his face, usually so controlled, so unreadable, was a mask of something Claire had never seen on him before. Fear. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did anyone touch you? Claire, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said. "It was just the window, just a brick and a note, and—" She stopped. "Alexander, there was a phone call 3 days ago. I didn't tell you. A man called me. He said he was an old friend of yours. He said you took something from him 11 years ago, and he's been waiting to take something back from you." Alexander went absolutely still. The fear on his face drained away, and what replaced it was worse, far worse, a cold and terrible blankness. The face of the man Claire had spent 2 months telling herself wasn't really there. "What did he sound like?" Alexander asked. His voice was very quiet. "Tell me exactly, every word," Claire told him. She told him about the calm, pleasant voice, the history, the 11 years, the poor children, the thank you. And with every word she spoke, she watched her husband's face grow colder and older and more frightening until she was looking at a stranger, until she was looking at Alexander Romano the way the rest of New York saw him, and she understood for the first time exactly why they were all so afraid. "Salvatore," Alexander said finally. It was barely more than a breath. "His name is Salvatore Bianchi." "Who is he?" Alexander turned away from her. He walked to the shattered window and stood looking out at the street, and when he spoke, his voice was flat and distant, like he was reading from somewhere far away. 11 years ago, he said, before my father died, there was a war. 2 families fighting over territory, Salvatore's family and mine. It went on for 2 years, and a lot of people died on both sides. And then, near the end, I did something." He paused. "I was young. I was angry. Salvatore's people had killed someone who mattered to me, a friend, maybe the only real friend I ever had, and so I struck back. I hit them where it hurt most." His hands closed into fists at his sides. "I gave the order that ended the war, and when the smoke cleared, Salvatore had lost everything, his family's power, his territory, and his son." Claire's stomach turned over. "You killed his son." "I gave an order," Alexander said, "and his son died carrying it out. He was 19. He was in the wrong place because I put him there." He turned back to face her, and his eyes were haunted. "I've done a lot of things, Claire. Things I'll answer for someday. But that's the one that wakes me at 3 in the morning. That's the one I can't put down. I destroyed a man's whole world and killed his boy, and I've spent 11 years waiting for him to come back and make me pay for it." And he looked at the shattered window, at the brick, at the note. "And now he has. Except he's not coming for me. He's smarter than that. He's coming for you." The silence that followed was the longest of Claire's life. "Why me?" she finally asked. "I have nothing to do with any of this. I teach chess. I've never hurt anyone." "That's exactly why," said Alexander. "Don't you see? For 11 years I made sure I loved nothing and no one. I made sure there was nothing anyone could take from me. Salvatore couldn't touch me because there was nothing to touch." His voice cracked just slightly. "And then I met a woman across a chessboard and I broke my own rule. I let the door open. I let myself care about you, Claire. And he saw it. God help me. He saw it before I even admitted it to myself. And now he's going to use you to destroy me, and it's my fault. It's entirely my fault because I let myself—" He stopped. He couldn't finish. But Claire heard the rest of the sentence anyway, the words he couldn't say, hanging in the cold air of the broken room, and her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Because I let myself love you." "Alexander," she whispered. "You have to leave," he said suddenly, turning to her, and his voice was fierce now, desperate. "That was the deal. You said if you ever felt unsafe, you could walk away, and I'd let you. Well, you're not safe. You're the opposite of safe. So go. Take the money, take the program, take all of it, and go somewhere Salvatore can't find you, and forget you ever met me. That's the smart move, Claire. That's the only move." His jaw tightened. "Make the smart move. Please. For once in your life, do the sensible thing and walk away from the lonely man." And Claire looked at him. She looked at this dangerous, broken, terrified man, standing in a room full of broken glass, begging her to save herself, offering her the door she had made him promise to leave open, giving her everything she needed to get out clean and safe and rich and free. And she thought about all the times in her life she had been told to make the smart move. She thought about how the smart move would have been to give up on the program years ago. The smart move would have been to never walk into that gala. The smart move would have been to take the check and run the moment Alexander confessed he was a criminal. Every smart move in her whole life had pointed away from the things that mattered most, and every single time, Claire Bennett had looked at the smart move and then done the brave one instead. "No," she said. Alexander stared at her. "Claire." "No?" she said again, and her voice was steady now, steadier than his, steady like it had been across the chessboard the night they met. I'm not going to run. I'm not going to abandon those kids because some man with a grudge threw a brick through a window. And I'm not going to abandon you either. She stepped toward him. You spent 11 years making sure you loved nothing so no one could hurt you. And look what it did to you. It made you the loneliest man in New York. That's not safety, Alexander. That's a prison, and I'm not going to help you lock the door again. You don't understand what he'll do, Alexander said. You don't understand what these people are capable of. He will hurt you, Claire. He'll do things to you that I can't even... Then we stop him, said Claire. Together. That's what people do when they care about each other. They don't run. They stand and fight. She reached out and took his hand, and it was the first time she had ever touched him on purpose, and she felt him go still with shock. You told me love is a door you leave open for your enemies, but you're wrong. Love is the only thing that's ever been worth fighting for. I learned that from 40 kids who had nothing and loved each other anyway, and I'm going to teach it to you if it kills me. Alexander looked down at her hand in his, and this feared and terrible man, this master of violence, this stranger she had married for money and children, did something Claire never could have predicted. He began to cry, silently, without a sound, tears just spilling down the face of a man who had probably not let himself cry since he was a child in a house full of dangerous men, and Claire pulled him toward her and held him, this enormous, dangerous, grieving man, and he held her back like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I don't deserve you, he said into her hair. No, Claire agreed. You don't. But you've got me anyway, so we'd better make it count. They stood there for a long time, in the room full of broken glass, holding on to each other, two people who had walked into a fake marriage and stumbled into something terrifyingly real. And neither of them saw the car parked across the street. And neither of them saw the man in the driver's seat lowering his phone after taking a photograph of the two of them embracing through the shattered window, a photograph he would send, within the hour, to Salvatore Bianchi. And neither of them could have known that when Salvatore looked at that photograph, at the sight of Alexander Romano weeping in the arms of a woman, at the naked, undeniable proof that the man who had destroyed his family had finally, at last, let himself love something, he would smile the coldest smile of his life and pick up his phone and make the call that would set everything that followed into terrible motion. It's confirmed, Salvatore said, staring at the photograph of Claire. He loves her. He truly loves her. He set the phone down. Move up the timeline. I've waited 11 years. I'm not waiting another day. A pause. And find out everything about those children she teaches, the little chess players. His voice was soft, almost tender, and it was the most frightening sound in the world. If we want to break Alexander Romano, we're going to have to break her first. And I know exactly how to do it. Across the city, unaware, Claire pulled back from Alexander's embrace and wiped the tears from his face with her thumbs, and she smiled at him, brave and foolish and utterly unafraid. Now, she said, are you going to tell me how we fight back? Because I didn't marry the most dangerous man in New York to hide under a table. You have an empire. You have soldiers. You have power. Her eyes flashed. So let's use it. Let's show Salvatore Bianchi what happens when he threatens the wrong chess teacher. And Alexander, looking at his wife, this woman who should have run and didn't, this woman who was offering to stand beside him against an enemy who wanted them both dead, felt something rise in his chest that he had not felt in 11 long years. Hope. Dangerous, reckless, world-burning hope. All right, he said. All right, but if we do this, we do it my way. And Claire, I need you to understand something before we start. He took both her hands in his. The moment we fight back, there's no going home, no walking away. The door you made me promise to leave open, the one where you get to leave whenever you want. If we do this, that door closes, for both of us. Salvatore won't stop until one of us is dead. Do you understand what I'm asking you to give up? Claire looked at him, and she thought about it, truly thought about it, this last chance to save herself, this final open door. Then she reached up and she closed it herself. I understand, she said. Now let's win. Now let's win, she had said. And Alexander had looked at her like she was either the bravest woman he had ever met or the most foolish, and the truth, as it turned out, was that she was both. The war began quietly. Alexander did not send soldiers into the street. He was smarter than that, and so he was learning was Salvatore. This was not going to be a war of bullets, at least not at first. This was going to be a war of chess. And Claire, watching her husband work over the following days, came to understand that the man she had beaten in 12 moves that night at the gala had spent his whole life playing a far more dangerous version of the same game. "He'll expect me to protect you," Alexander explained, spreading papers across the library table where they had played so many games. "He'll expect me to lock you away, surround you with men, hide you. And the moment I do that, I've told him exactly how much you matter to me. I've confirmed his target." He looked up at her. "So we're not going to do that. We're going to do the opposite. We're going to make him think he was wrong. We're going to make him think you don't matter to me at all." Claire frowned. "How?" "We stop being seen together. We fight, publicly, loudly, in front of the right people. Word travels fast in my world. Within a week, everyone will know that the Romano marriage is falling apart, that the chess teacher was a mistake, that Alexander is already tired of her." He paused. "It'll be a performance, the most important performance of your life. Salvatore has to believe it, because the moment he believes you don't matter to me, he loses his weapon. You stop being leverage. And a chess teacher who isn't leverage isn't worth the risk of coming after." Claire studied him. "You want us to pretend to hate each other." "I want us to pretend the marriage was exactly what the contract said it was," Alexander said quietly. "A business deal that soured, nothing more." And Claire understood then the terrible irony of what he was asking, because it had been exactly that, once, a business deal, a contract. And now, standing in this library where they had talked until 3 a.m, night after night, where she had held him while he wept, where something real and unnameable had grown between them, he was asking her to pretend it had never happened. "And if it works?" she asked. "If Salvatore believes it, then what?" "Then you're safe," said Alexander. "And I deal with Salvatore my way, without having to worry about him using you against me. And when it's over—" He stopped. "When it's over, what?" He didn't answer. He looked down at the papers on the table, and Claire realized he didn't have an answer, that he had not let himself think that far ahead, because thinking that far ahead meant admitting what he would lose if the performance became permanent. "We should start tonight," was all he said. "There's a dinner, the Castellanos. Half of New York's worst people will be there, and every one of them a gossip. It's the perfect stage." The dinner was a nightmare. Claire had attended a dozen of these events by now, and she had learned to hold her own among the sharks. But this was different. This time she and Alexander arrived separately. This time they did not speak when she entered. This time, when a woman with cruel eyes asked Claire pointedly how married life was treating her, Claire had to force herself to say, with a bitter little laugh that felt like swallowing glass, "Oh, you know how it is. The shine wears off." And across the room, Alexander stood with a group of men and did not look at her. And when someone asked about his wife, he shrugged and said something cold and dismissive, something Claire couldn't hear but could read in the smug satisfaction that spread across the faces of the men around him. It worked. That was the horrible thing. It worked beautifully. By the end of the night, Claire could feel the story taking hold, could see it in the way people looked at her now, with pity, with a kind of vindicated glee, the mighty chess teacher brought low, the fairy tale falling apart just like they'd all predicted it would. But something else happened at that dinner too, something neither of them had planned. Near the end of the night, Claire found herself cornered by an old man she didn't recognize, a small, elegant man with silver hair and a warm smile, who took her hand and kissed it and said, "You must be Claire. I've heard so much about you." "I'm sorry," Claire said. "I don't think we've met." "No," the old man agreed, "we haven't. But we have a friend in common, your husband." His smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, and Claire's blood turned to ice, because she knew before he said another word, exactly who was holding her hand. "You're Salvatore," she whispered. "I'm delighted to finally meet you in person," said Salvatore Bianchi, and his voice was the same calm, pleasant voice from the phone, and up close it was so much worse. "I've admired you from a distance for weeks, and I have to say, Claire, I'm disappointed." He tilted his head. All this talk of the marriage falling apart, the public fights, the cold shoulders. He clicked his tongue softly. "It's a very good performance, truly, but you're forgetting something." "What's that?" Claire managed. "I've known Alexander Romano for 30 years, Salvatore said. "I knew his father. I watched that boy grow up into the cold, empty thing he became, and I have never, not once in all those years, seen him look at anything the way he looked at you through that broken window 3 days ago." His grip on her hand tightened, just slightly, just enough. "You can put on all the performances you like, my dear, but I have a photograph of a man weeping in your arms, and photographs don't lie." He released her hand. "Enjoy your evening, and do give my regards to your husband. Tell him the game's already over. He just doesn't know it yet." And he walked away, leaving Claire standing frozen in the middle of the party, understanding with total clarity that their entire plan had already failed, that Salvatore had seen through it before it even began, that the photograph through the window had undone them, and that somewhere in this room, full of dangerous people, the trap was already closing. She found Alexander. She broke every rule of the performance and crossed the room and took his arm and said, low and urgent, "He's here, Salvatore. He's here, and he knows. The photograph, Alexander. Someone took a photograph of us through the window. He's known this whole time. The plan never had a chance." Alexander's face changed instantly. "Where is he?" "He just left. He said—" Claire's voice caught. "He said the game's already over. He said you just don't know it yet." And that was when the first phone in the room began to ring, then a second, then a third. All across the party, phones lighting up, buzzing, and Claire watched confusion ripple through the crowd, watched people pull out their devices, watched their faces change, and she felt Alexander go rigid beside her. "What is it?" she said. "What's happening?" Alexander pulled out his own phone, and Claire watched the blood drain from his face as he read whatever was on the screen, watched something break in him, watched the careful control he had maintained all night collapse into pure horror. "Alexander, what is it?" He turned the phone toward her. It was a photograph of her Bronx chess center. Except it was on fire. The whole building engulfed in flames, and beneath the photograph, 4 words, the same 4 words from the brick. "Nice place. Such a shame." "The kids," Claire breathed. "Alexander, the after-school program, is that— what time is it? Oh God, what time is it?" "It's 9 o'clock, Alexander said. "The center closed at 6. "Claire, the center closed at 6. The kids would have been gone by—" But even as he said it, another message came through, and this one was not a photograph. This one was a video, and Salvatore had sent it to both of them at once, and Claire pressed play with a shaking hand, and what she saw made her legs give out beneath her, so that Alexander had to catch her. It was Elijah, 9-year-old Elijah, who had won his first chess game and jumped up with his fists in the air, who had been so quiet when he first came to her that she thought he never spoke. He was sitting in a chair in a room she didn't recognize, and he was crying, and there was a man's hand on his small shoulder, and Salvatore's calm, pleasant voice was speaking off camera. "Such a bright boy," Salvatore said. "Such a talented little chess player. Miss Claire's favorite, I'm told. It would be a terrible shame if anything happened to him." A pause. "You have until midnight, Alexander. You know what I want. You know the price of your son's life all those years ago. Now you'll learn the price of hers. Come alone, come unarmed, or the boy is the first of many." The video ended. The party had gone silent around them. Everyone was staring, and Claire, on her knees on the floor of the Castellano mansion, looked up at her husband and saw a man she had never seen before, a man made entirely of ice and fury, a man who had spent 11 years keeping this exact monster locked away and was now, finally, letting it out. "Alexander," she said, "we have to call the police. We have to wait." "No police," Alexander said. His voice was flat, dead, terrifying. "There's no police for this, Claire. There's only me. And I'm going to get that boy back, and then I'm going to end Salvatore Bianchi, and I'm going to do things tonight that will make everything you've ever heard about me look like a bedtime story." He pulled her to her feet. "But first I have to know something, and I need you to answer me honestly." He gripped her shoulders. "Can you forgive me?" "For what I'm about to become tonight? Because the man who walks out of here is not the man you've been sitting up playing chess with. That man is going to have to die tonight so that little boy can live. And I need to know if there's anything worth coming back to when it's done." And Claire, terrified, heartbroken, thinking of Elijah crying in that chair, looked at her husband, and she made a decision. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. He wants me, Alexander. That's the whole point. You and me. That's what this has always been about. If you go alone, he kills the boy and he kills you, and then he comes for me anyway." She grabbed his face in both her hands, forcing him to look at her. "But if we go together, if we walk in there together, we take away the one thing he wants most. He wants to see you break. He wants to see you beg. Well, we're not going to give him a broken man begging. We're going to give him something he's never seen. We're going to give him two people who aren't afraid of him." Her eyes blazed. "I beat you at chess by making you think you were winning, right up until you'd already lost. So let's play Salvatore the same way. Let's walk in there and let him think he's won, and then let's show him he never understood the board at all." Alexander stared at her, and slowly, terribly, he began to smile. "You," he said softly, "are the most dangerous woman I have ever met, and I've met a lot of dangerous women." "I learned from the best," said Claire. "Now let's go get our boy." The drive to Salvatore's compound took 40 minutes, and Claire spent every one of them terrified. But she did not let Alexander see it, because she understood now that fear was the currency Salvatore traded in, and she refused to give him a single coin. Alexander made 3 phone calls on the way, speaking in low, clipped tones, in a language of his world that Claire didn't fully understand, but the meaning of which she could feel in her bones. He was moving pieces. He was setting a trap. He was doing to Salvatore exactly what she had done to him at the gala, and Claire realized she had, without meaning to, taught her husband something after all. They arrived at midnight. Salvatore's men took Alexander's phone, patted him down, found him unarmed, exactly as instructed. They were less sure what to do with Claire, who they had not expected, and there was a tense moment where guns came up, and Alexander stepped in front of her without thinking, his body a shield. And Claire understood that whatever performance they had put on at the party, this, right here, was the truth. This was a man who would die for her without a second's hesitation. They were brought into a large room, and there was Salvatore, sitting in a chair like a king, and there, beside him, in another chair, small and terrified but alive, was Elijah. "Miss Claire!" the boy cried out, and tried to run to her, and a man's hand pushed him back down into the chair, and Claire's whole body strained toward him. "It's okay, Elijah," she said, and she made her voice as calm and steady as she had ever made it, the voice she used to teach frightened children that they could beat a problem bigger than themselves. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here. We're going to go home soon. I promise." "You shouldn't make promises you can't keep," said Salvatore. "I keep all my promises," said Claire. Salvatore's eyes moved to her, and there was something almost like admiration in them, and something else, something colder. "You came," he said. "I told him to come alone, and he brought his wife, the wife he's supposedly divorcing." He chuckled. "You really are terrible liars, both of you." "We're done lying," said Alexander. "You wanted me here. I'm here. Let the boy go. This is between you and me. It always was. He has nothing to do with it." "Neither did my son," said Salvatore. And the room went very quiet, and Claire watched 11 years of grief and rage rise up in the old man's face, and she understood that this was the heart of it. This was the wound that had never healed. This was the thing that had made a man into a monster. "He was 19, Salvatore said, his voice shaking now. "My boy, my only son. He wasn't even a soldier, Alexander. He didn't want any of it, the family, the business, the killing. He wanted to be a doctor. Did you know that? He wanted to help people. And you put him in the middle of your war, and you gave the order. and my beautiful boy died in the street like an animal, and I held him while he bled out, and I promised my dying son that I would make you feel exactly what I felt." Tears ran down his face. "And now you understand. Now finally, after 11 years, you understand. Because now you love something too. And I'm going to take it from you, the same way you took mine." Aye. He nodded to one of his men, and the man raised a gun and pointed it at Claire. And everything happened very fast. Alexander moved, but he was too far away. Salvatore's men were faster, and in the half-second before anything else could happen, Claire did the only thing she could think to do, the thing she had been building toward since the moment she walked into that room, the move she had set up 3 moves ago that Salvatore hadn't seen. She started talking to Elijah. "Elijah," she said, loud and clear and calm, cutting straight through the tension. "Do you remember what I taught you about the endgame? Do you remember what I said about the king?" The boy, terrified, confused, stared at her. "I said the king looks like the most important piece," Claire went on, her eyes never leaving the child, though every word was aimed somewhere else entirely. "But he's actually the weakest. He can only move 1 square at a time. He needs everyone else to protect him. And a good player, Elijah, a good player knows that the whole game is about the king's position, where he's standing, because sometimes—" And here her voice changed, and she looked up, past Elijah, to the window behind Salvatore's chair. "Sometimes the king puts himself in check without even knowing it." Salvatore frowned. "What are you—" And that was when the window shattered, because Alexander had made 3 phone calls in the car, and Alexander had not brought a weapon, because they had known he'd be searched. But Alexander was the most dangerous man in New York, and he had not survived 39 years in his world by walking into rooms without a plan. And while Claire had kept every eye in that room fixed on her, on the boy, on the chess lesson that was not a chess lesson at all, Alexander's men had gotten into position exactly where he'd told them to be. What followed, Claire would never be able to fully remember afterward. It came in fragments, shouting, the gun going off, the bullet going wide because the man holding it had turned toward the window. Alexander moving, faster than she'd ever seen a person move, throwing himself not at Salvatore, but at Elijah, covering the boy's small body with his own. Claire diving for the child from the other side, the 3 of them tangled together on the floor while chaos exploded around them. And when it was over, when the smoke cleared and the shouting stopped, Salvatore Bianchi was on his knees on the floor of his own compound, disarmed, surrounded, his men subdued, his 11-year plan collapsed in a matter of seconds. And Alexander stood over him. He had a gun now. He had taken it from one of Salvatore's own men, and he stood over the kneeling old man who had burned Claire's chess center and terrorized her and kidnapped a 9-year-old child. And Claire watched her husband's finger tighten on the trigger, and she watched 11 years of guilt and rage reach their final, terrible moment. "Alexander," she said. He didn't look at her. "This is who I am, Claire," he said, and his voice was breaking. "This is what I do. He took a child. He would have killed you. This is the only language men like us understand." "I know who you are," said Claire. She stepped closer, slowly, the way you approach a frightened animal. "I've known since our first dinner. You told me yourself, and you didn't lie, and I married you anyway." She reached out and put her hand on his arm, on the arm holding the gun. "But I also know who you could be. I've seen him. He came to a chess tournament and watched a little boy win and said it was the first honest room he'd been in for years. He funds hospitals he'll never take credit for. He cried in my arms and told me he didn't deserve to be loved." Her voice dropped. "That man is real too, Alexander. He's just as real as this one. And right now, you get to choose which one walks out of this room." Salvatore, on his knees, laughed bitterly. "Do it," he spat. "Kill me. Prove her wrong. Prove you're exactly what I always knew you were. Give my son's ghost the satisfaction of watching you damn yourself." "He wants you to do it," Claire said softly. "Don't you see? This is his last move. He can't beat you, so he wants to make you into the monster he needs you to be, so that even in losing, he wins. He turns you back into the man who killed his son. He proves he was right about you all along. She squeezed his arm. "Don't let him. Beat him the way I beat you. Do the thing he never sees coming. Show him mercy." The whole room was frozen, and Alexander Romano stood over his oldest enemy, gun in hand, and Claire watched the war on his face, the 11 years of guilt, the newer, stranger thing she had planted in him, and she held her breath, and she did not know, she truly did not know, which man was going to win. Then Alexander lowered the gun. "His name was Matteo," Alexander said quietly. Salvatore's head jerked up. "Your son, Matteo. I never let myself say his name in 11 years, because saying it meant admitting he was real, that he was a person, that he wanted to be a doctor and help people, and I took that from the world." Alexander's voice shook. "I've thought about him every single day. I'm not asking you to forgive me. There's no forgiveness for what I did, and I'm not going to insult his memory by asking for it. But I'm not going to kill you tonight, Salvatore. Not because I'm merciful. I'm not. But because Matteo wanted to save lives, and I've taken enough from him already. I'm not going to make his father's death one more thing I owe him." He set the gun down on the floor. "Let him go," Alexander told his men. "Let all of them go. This ends tonight. The war's over. It's been over for 11 years. I'm the only one who kept fighting it, and I'm done." And Salvatore Bianchi, kneeling on the floor of his own defeated compound, looked up at the man who had every reason to kill him and had chosen not to, and something in the old man's face crumpled, some brittle thing that had been holding him upright for 11 long years, and he began to weep, great heaving sobs, the grief he had turned into rage finally, at last, becoming just grief again, and Claire watched two broken men look at each other across a lifetime of pain, and she understood that she had witnessed something she would never forget. She pulled Elijah into her arms and held him tight, and the boy clung to her, and she whispered that he was safe, that it was over, that he was going home. And Alexander turned away from Salvatore and looked at his wife, holding the child she had risked everything to save. And the expression on his face was one Claire had never seen on any human being, a look of such total, undefended love that it stopped her heart. He crossed the room to her. "You did it," he said. "You beat him. You beat all of it. The whole thing. You saw it 3 moves ahead. The boy, the window, all of it. You—" He stopped, overwhelmed. "How did you know I'd made the calls? How did you know to keep everyone looking at you?" "I didn't know," Claire admitted. "I hoped. I trusted you." She smiled up at him, exhausted, shaking, alive. "That's the thing about the two of us, Alexander. We're both playing the same game. I just play it with children, and you play it with your life. But it's the same game, and I trusted you to make your move while I made mine." Alexander looked at her for a long moment. And then, in front of his men, in front of his defeated enemy, in front of a 9-year-old chess prodigy, Alexander Romano did the second most surprising thing he had ever done. "The contract," he said. "The 1-year contract. The marriage of convenience. What about it?" "Tear it up," said Alexander. "Burn it. I don't want a year, Claire. I don't want an arrangement. I don't want a performance." His voice broke completely now. "I married you for a lie, and somewhere along the way it became the only true thing in my whole life. I love you. Not as a deal. Not as leverage. Not as anything except a man who spent 40 years locking every door in his heart and then met a chess teacher who picked every single lock." He took her face in his hands. "Stay. Not for a year. For real. For good. Marry me again. For the right reasons this time. Please." And Claire Bennett, standing in the wreckage of a war that was finally over, holding a rescued child, looking up at the dangerous, broken, transformed man she had never meant to love, felt the last piece fall into place on a board she had been playing since the night she walked into that gala with nothing but an old chessboard and impossible dreams. But before she could answer, before she could say the word that was rising in her throat, Elijah tugged at her sleeve and pointed across the room and said in his small, clear voice the words that turned everything cold again. "Miss Claire, why is that man on the phone?" And Claire looked, and there, in the corner, one of Salvatore's men, forgotten in the chaos, was speaking urgently into a phone, and as every head in the room turned toward him, he lowered it slowly, and he smiled, and he said the words that told Claire the game was not over at all. "You think Salvatore was the one giving the orders?" the man said softly. "You think this was ever about a dead boy? He slipped the phone into his pocket. Salvatore was a tool, just like the chess teacher, just like all of you. He looked at Alexander. The real player has been sitting at your own table this whole time, Romano, and they've been waiting 11 years for you to gather everyone you love into one room. And from somewhere outside the compound, in the dark, Claire heard the sound of many cars approaching. The sound of those cars in the dark should have made Alexander reach for the gun he had just set down. Instead, he went very still, and Claire watched something move across his face that frightened her more than any weapon could have. Not fear. Recognition. "The real player has been sitting at my own table," Alexander repeated slowly. "Say the name." The man in the corner smiled. "You already know it. You've known for years. You just never let yourself believe it, because believing it would mean admitting the one thing you can't admit." He spread his hands. "Family." And that was when the doors opened, and Vittoria Romano walked into the room. Claire's mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. The tiny, elegant, terrifying old woman who had held her hand at that first dinner and told her, "God help you, child." The matriarch who had laughed her rusty laugh and warned Claire not to hurt her grandson. Alexander's grandmother, the true power behind the family, walking calmly into the compound of the man who had supposedly been the enemy this whole time, flanked by soldiers who answered to her and her alone. "Nonna," Alexander breathed. "No." "Sit down, Alexander," said Vittoria, and her voice was not cruel, which was somehow the most terrible thing of all. It was tired. It was almost tender. "You've had a very long night. Sit down and let your grandmother explain what has to happen now." "You," Alexander said. "It was you, this whole time. Salvatore, the threats, the boy. You were pulling the strings behind Salvatore. You used a grieving father as your puppet." "Salvatore came to me 11 years ago wanting revenge," Vittoria said, moving slowly into the room, her ringed hands folded. "I let him keep his grief. It was useful. A man consumed by hatred is a wonderful tool. Point him at your target and he does your work for you, and if he fails, well, no one traces it back to the family." She looked at the kneeling Salvatore with something like pity. "I'm sorry, Salvatore. Truly. But your son died for my purposes, just as much as for my grandson's mistakes. I've been steering you for over a decade. You never once suspected the hand on your shoulder was mine." Salvatore stared at her in dawning horror. "You," he whispered, "all these years. You told me you grieved with me. You told me you'd help me." "I lied," said Vittoria simply. "I'm very good at it. It's the family talent." Claire pulled Elijah tighter against her, and she felt her whole understanding of the last 3 months tilt and crack. "Why?" she said. "Why would you do this to your own grandson? You love him. I saw it. That first dinner, I saw the way you looked at him." "Because I love him," said Vittoria, turning to Claire with those ancient, patient eyes, "is exactly why. Sit down, girl. You especially need to hear this, because you're the reason it all had to happen now." She lowered herself into a chair with the slow care of the very old. "My grandson was perfect. Do you understand? For 11 years he was the perfect head of this family, cold, careful, untouchable. He loved nothing, so he could lose nothing, so no enemy could ever move him. He was the strongest leader this family ever had, precisely because he was empty." Her voice hardened. "And then you walked into a charity gala with a chessboard, and in 12 moves you ruined everything." "I don't understand," Claire said. "You made him human again," Vittoria said. And now there was real anguish in her voice, the anguish of a woman who had made a monstrous choice and knew it. "You gave him something to lose, and the moment a man in our world has something to lose, he becomes weak. He hesitates. He compromises. He starts thinking about chess tournaments and rescued children instead of power and survival. I watched it happen week by week. I watched my perfect grandson turn soft in front of my eyes. And I knew with absolute certainty that a soft leader gets this whole family killed." She looked at Claire with terrible clarity. "So I had a choice. I could let him love you and watch our enemies tear us apart the moment they smelled his weakness. Or I could take you away from him, brutally, publicly, in a way that would break his heart so completely he'd never dare open it again. I chose to save the family. I chose to save him, even if he hates me for it forever. The room was silent except for Elijah's frightened breathing. "You were going to kill me," Claire said quietly. "I was going to kill you," Vittoria agreed. "Tonight, here, with Salvatore's men, so it looked like the old war, so no one would ever know it was me. Alexander would grieve, and then he would harden, and then he would go back to being the man who kept us all alive. That was the plan." She sighed, and for a moment she looked every one of her 83 years. "It was a good plan. I've been building it for months." "Then why are you telling us?" Alexander demanded. "Why explain any of it? Why not just—" "Because I made a mistake," said Vittoria. "I came here tonight to watch you die, Claire. I was going to stand in this room and see it done with my own eyes, because that is the kind of thing you must have the stomach to do yourself, if you're going to lead." She looked at Claire, and something in her old face was breaking. "And I got here early, and I stood outside that window, and I watched. I watched my grandson stand over Salvatore with a gun in his hand. I watched him have every reason in the world to pull that trigger, and I watched you talk him out of it." Her voice cracked. "I watched you teach him mercy. In 11 years, I could not teach that boy mercy. His father beat it out of him before he was 10, and you did it with a few sentences and your hand on his arm." She stood, slowly, painfully. "And I realized I had made the oldest mistake there is," Vittoria said. "I thought love made him weak, but I just watched love make him stronger than I've ever seen him. He beat Salvatore without firing a shot. He ended an 11-year war with a single act of mercy. That is not weakness, Claire. I was wrong. I have been wrong about the nature of strength for 60 years, and I was too proud and too frightened to see it until tonight." Alexander was staring at his grandmother like he had never seen her before. "Then call them off," he said. "The men outside, the cars. Call them off, Nonna, please." Vittoria was quiet for a long moment. "I can't," she said. "What do you mean you can't?" "I mean, I set something in motion tonight that is bigger than me now." She turned to the man in the corner, the one who had made the phone call, and her face went cold again. "Tell him, Marco. Tell him what you've done." The man named Marco smiled, and Claire realized with a fresh wave of horror that there was yet another layer to this, that the board was even more crowded than she'd understood. "The old woman's gone soft too," Marco said, "just like her grandson. I've been watching her for weeks, waiting for her to lose her nerve, and tonight she did. She stood at that window, and I saw her hesitate. I saw her decide not to give the order." He pulled out the phone again. "So, I gave it for her. The men outside don't answer to Vittoria anymore. They answer to me. And they have orders to kill everyone in this room. The chess teacher, the boy, Alexander, and you, Vittoria. The whole soft, sentimental lot of you." His smile widened. "It's time this family had a leader who understands that love, mercy, family, it's all just weakness with a pretty name. I'll build something stronger out of the ashes." And Claire understood, finally, the full and terrible shape of the game. Salvatore had been Vittoria's tool, and Vittoria had been Marco's. A betrayal, inside a betrayal, inside a betrayal. 11 years in the making, and now every player who had ever sat at this board was trapped in one room while the last conspirator soldiers surrounded them in the dark. "Marco," Vittoria said, and her voice had gone deadly, "you forget who taught you everything you know." "No, Nonna," said Marco, and the word was an insult in his mouth. "I remember perfectly. You taught me that the strong take from the weak. I'm simply a better student than your grandson ever was." What happened next happened in the space of a single held breath, because Claire Bennett, chess teacher from Brooklyn, had spent the entire conversation doing the one thing she had always done best. She had been watching the board while everyone else watched each other, and she had seen, minutes ago, something no one else in that room full of dangerous people had noticed, because they were all looking at the powerful players, and none of them were looking at the smallest piece. Elijah. The boy, terrified, silent, had never let go of the one thing he'd been holding since Salvatore's men grabbed him from the chess center, his backpack. And in that backpack, Claire knew, because she had put it there herself that very afternoon, was the wireless panic button she had installed in every one of her centers after the first brick came through the window. A direct line to a private security company Alexander had insisted on hiring, a button she had taught every child to press if anyone ever frightened them. And she had whispered to Elijah, in the middle of her fake chess lesson, in words disguised as talk about the king's position, exactly what to do and when. Elijah had pressed the button 11 minutes ago. "Marco," Claire said, standing slowly, holding the boy's hand, her voice ringing out clear and calm across the room. "Can I tell you the thing I've learned about men like you, men who think they see the whole board?" She smiled, and it was the same smile she had given Alexander across a chessboard the night they met, the smile of someone who set a trap 3 moves ago and is watching you finally step into it. "You're always so busy watching the powerful pieces that you never see the pawn who's already reached the other side of the board. And the doors blew open. Not Marco's men, not Vittoria's. The security team Alexander had hired to protect Claire's chess centers, the ones the panic button had summoned, real professionals. And behind them, because Claire's security company had done exactly what the law required when a child's panic alarm was triggered at a location tied to a kidnapping, the actual police, sirens and all. More of them than Claire had ever seen in one place. Marco's men in the dark had been waiting for a quiet massacre. They had not been prepared for the entire situation to become the single most documented, most witnessed, most surrounded event of the night. You cannot make a room full of people disappear when it is lit up by police floodlights and surrounded by officers who received a verified child abduction alert. The whole logic of the ambush collapsed in an instant. In the chaos, Marco lunged for Claire, understanding in a flash of pure hatred that this small woman had beaten him, that the chess teacher had been playing them all along, and his hands reached for her throat. He never got there, because Alexander Romano moved, and this time he was close enough. He put himself between Marco and Claire, and the two men went down together, and Claire pulled Elijah away and shielded the boy's eyes. And when it was over, Marco was in handcuffs, and so, quietly, without resistance, her hands folded and her ancient head held high, was Vittoria Romano. The old woman looked at Claire as the officers led her past. "You had a piece in play the whole time," Vittoria said, and there was something almost like pride in her voice. "The child, the panic button. You set it in motion this afternoon, before you even knew tonight would happen. You're always 3 moves ahead, aren't you, girl?" "I learned to be," said Claire. "When you spend your whole life being underestimated, you learn to plan for the worst while everyone's laughing at you." Vittoria nodded slowly. "I underestimated you from the very first night." She paused at the door, an old woman in handcuffs who had ruled an empire of violence for 60 years and been undone by a chess teacher and a 9-year-old with a backpack. "Take care of him," she said, and her eyes went to Alexander. "I did everything wrong. Everything. I thought I was protecting him by keeping him empty, and all I did was make him lonely for 40 years. Her voice broke. "You filled it. Whatever I am, whatever I've done, I'm grateful for that. Take care of my boy." And then she was gone. The aftermath took hours. Statements and questions and the slow untangling of 11 years of conspiracy. Salvatore Bianchi, when the police came for him, did not resist either. He looked at Alexander one last time before they took him, and something passed between the two men, some acknowledgement, and Salvatore said quietly, "You said his name, Matteo, 11 years, and you're the first person besides me to say his name." His eyes were wet. "I wanted you to become a monster tonight, and instead, you became a man. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I think Matteo would have liked her." He nodded at Claire. He would have liked what she made you into. And then he too was gone. It was nearly dawn when Claire finally sat down on the steps outside the compound, exhausted beyond anything she had ever felt. Elijah asleep against her shoulder, safe, whole, going home. Alexander sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "My own grandmother," Alexander said finally. "My own family. All this time." He shook his head slowly. "You know what the worst part is? I understand her. God help me, I understand exactly what she did and why, because it's what I did to myself for 11 years. I kept my own heart empty for the exact same reason she wanted to keep it empty, to stay strong, to stay safe." He looked at Claire. She wasn't a monster, Claire. She was just a woman who was so afraid of losing the people she loved that she decided not to love them at all, and she almost took you from me to prove a point I spent my whole life believing. "That love is weakness," Claire said softly. "That love is weakness," Alexander agreed. He turned to her, and in the gray light of the coming morning, his face was open and undefended in a way it had never been. "But it isn't. I know that now. I watched it tonight. Love didn't make me weak. It made me stronger than an entire criminal empire. It made a 9-year-old boy brave enough to press a button. It ended a war I couldn't end with all the guns in New York." He took her hand. "You were right. From the very first night, across that chessboard, you were right about everything. Strength doesn't come from money or fear or power. It comes from finding someone brave enough to challenge you and humble enough to change with you." Amal Sipal Kuwait. Claire looked at him, this transformed man, this door that had finally, fully opened. "You remembered," she said. "I remember everything you've ever said to me," said Alexander. "I've been studying you since the night we met. I told you that. I sat across a board from you 100 times, trying to read your soul." He smiled, and it was the realest smile she had ever seen on him. "I finally read it. It says you don't quit on lonely people. It says you'd rather do the brave thing than the smart thing. It says you love completely or not at all." His voice dropped. "And it says, if I'm very, very lucky, that you might love me." Claire was quiet for a moment, the sleeping child warm against her shoulder, the terrible night finally behind them. "The contract," she said. "Burn it," said Alexander. "I told you, I don't want a year. I already burned it," said Claire. Alexander blinked. "What?" "Weeks ago," she said, and she was smiling now, tears in her eyes. "The night you cried in my arms in the room full of broken glass. I went home, and I took my copy of that stupid contract, and I burned it in my kitchen sink. Because I already knew. I knew it wasn't a year. I knew it wasn't an arrangement. I knew somewhere around the 20th game of chess in that library, when you started telling me the truth about yourself, that I wasn't going anywhere." She reached up and touched his face. "I married a monster for money and children, and somewhere along the way, the monster turned into the man I love. I didn't plan it. It's the one thing in my whole life I never saw 3 moves ahead, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me." And Alexander Romano, feared throughout New York, master of a criminal empire that he would spend the rest of his life dismantling and turning towards something better, pulled his wife into his arms and held her while the sun came up. And for the first time in his entire life, he was not afraid of losing what he loved. Because he finally understood that the love itself was the thing that made him strong enough to protect it. The months that followed changed everything. With Vittoria gone and Marco in prison and Salvatore's war finally, truly over, Alexander did the thing no one in his world thought possible. He began to take the empire apart. Not all at once, because that would have gotten people killed, but piece by piece, carefully, the way Claire took apart a chess position, he turned the machine of violence towards something else. Legitimate businesses, real jobs for men who had only ever known crime, and money, so much money, poured quietly into the one thing that had started it all. Claire's chess program became the largest youth foundation in New York City. It reached the Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island and Manhattan. It reached children who had nothing, the way Claire once had nothing, and it told them the things she had spent her whole life trying to teach. That they were smart, that they could sit across from a problem bigger than themselves and beat it, if they stayed calm and thought clearly and refused to be afraid. Elijah, the boy who pressed the button, became the youngest state champion in the program's history, and when they asked him how he stayed so calm under pressure, he always said the same thing. Miss Claire taught me. She said the scared feeling and the ready feeling feel exactly the same in your body, so you just decide it's the ready one. People asked Alexander sometimes why he had proposed to a woman after she beat him at chess. Reporters asked it. Business partners asked it. The story had become famous, the legend of the Mafia boss and the chess teacher, and everyone wanted to understand it. And Alexander always gave the same answer, the true one. Because that was the first time in my life, he would say, that someone defeated me and made me want to become better instead of wanting to destroy them. She beat me in 12 moves, and she wasn't afraid of me. And I spent 40 years surrounded by people who were afraid of me, and not one of them ever made me want to be a good man. She did it in 12 moves. I'd have been a fool to let her walk away. And Claire, when they asked her, would think back to that night in the ballroom, the borrowed dress, the old chessboard, the stone in her shoe, and the dying dream. And the man who had looked at her and told her to go teach children their little games and leave the thinking to the adults. She would think about how close she had come to never walking into that gala at all, and she understood finally what the chess match had always really been about. It was never about winning. The checkmate was never the point. The real victory was two completely different people, from two completely different worlds, teaching each other the one thing neither of them had ever believed. That strength is not the wall you build around your heart. Strength is the courage to leave the door open, knowing what it might cost, and standing in that open doorway anyway, ready to fight for what you love. Their story had begun with a checkmate. But a checkmate, Claire always said, is only the end of one game, and every ending is just an invitation to set the pieces up again and begin something new. She and Alexander were married a second time that spring, in the community center where it all began, surrounded not by frightened billionaires, but by 40 children with chessboards. And this time there was no contract, and no arrangement, and no performance. This time there was only the truth. Two people who had underestimated each other and been underestimated by everyone, standing in a room full of kids who had been counted out just like they had, promising to spend the rest of their lives proving the world wrong. The woman everyone had underestimated had walked into the most dangerous world in New York with nothing but an old chessboard and impossible dreams. And she had not been destroyed by it. She had transformed it. She had taken the loneliest, most feared man in the city and taught him how to be human. And she had taken his empire of fear and turned it into a future for thousands of children who would never be underestimated again. Because in the end, the chess teacher from Brooklyn had been right about everything, right from the very first move. The board doesn't care how much money you have. It doesn't care who's afraid of you. The board tells the truth. And the truth was this: the strongest person in any room is never the one everybody fears. It is the one brave enough to love anyway. Long after the second wedding, long after the children had gone home with grass stains on their good clothes and chess trophies clutched in their hands, Claire and Alexander sat alone in the empty community center where everything had begun, and they talked about the thing they had both spent their whole lives getting wrong. And what they said to each other that night is worth telling, because it is the real lesson buried inside this whole story, the one that has nothing to do with mafia bosses or chessboards or fires in the night. They talked about the wall, because every person in this story built one. Alexander built a wall of ice around his heart and called it strength. Vittoria built a wall around her whole family and called it protection. Salvatore built a wall out of grief and called it justice. Marco built a wall out of contempt and called it clarity. And every single one of them believed the exact same lie, the oldest lie there is, the lie that whispers to us in our loneliest hours that the way to keep from getting hurt is to stop letting anyone close enough to hurt us. And here is the thing this story wants you to understand. If you are old enough to have loved and lost and been afraid to love again, every one of those walls failed. Every single one. The wall did not protect Vittoria. It made her into the very thing that destroyed her family. The wall did not protect Salvatore. It kept his son's death fresh and bleeding for 11 years so that his grief could never heal into something he could carry. The wall did not protect Alexander. It gave him 40 years of a cold and empty house and a life so guarded that his own grandmother could plot his heartbreak, and he never saw it coming, because a man who trusts no one can be betrayed by everyone. The walls we build to keep out pain are the same walls that keep out love. There has never been a wall that could tell the difference. You cannot build a fortress that lets in only the good and keeps out only the bad, because the door that love walks through is the exact same door that loss walks through, and if you nail it shut against the one, you have sealed it against the other, and you will sit safe and alone in your fortress while the whole warm world goes on without you. Alexander understood this now, and he said it out loud that night, sitting in the dark with his wife. "I thought I was being strong," he said. "For 40 years I thought the emptiness was strength. I looked at men who loved their wives and their children, and I pitied them, because I thought I could see something they couldn't. I thought I could see how vulnerable they were, how much they had to lose." He shook his head slowly. "And I was the one who couldn't see. I couldn't see that they were the rich ones. I was the poor man. I had all the money in New York, and I was the poorest man in the city, because I had nothing that could break my heart, which meant I had nothing worth having at all." And this is the paradox that sits at the center of every love worth the name, the thing that people spend whole lifetimes running from, and only the wisest ever turn around and face. The very thing that makes love precious is the same thing that makes it terrifying. Love is precious because it can be lost. If you could not lose it, it would be worth nothing. The trembling you feel when you love someone, the fear in the pit of your stomach when they are late coming home, the way your chest tightens when they cough in the night, that fear is not the enemy of love. That fear is the proof of it. That fear is the price, and it is the only honest price, and anyone who tells you there is a way to love without paying it is selling you a wall. Claire had known this her whole life, though she could not have put it into these words. She had known it every time she opened her heart to another frightened child who might break it, another kid who might not come back next semester, another young life she could not protect from the hard world waiting outside the community center doors. She loved them anyway. She had always loved them anyway. And that, more than any chess strategy, was the real thing she taught Alexander. Not how to win, how to stay open, how to keep the door unlocked even after you have learned exactly what can walk through it. "You want to know the bravest thing a person can do?" she said to him that night. "It isn't running into a burning building. It isn't standing up to a man with a gun. I've seen you do both of those things, and they were brave, but they weren't the bravest." She took his hand. "The bravest thing a person can do is get hurt badly, all the way down to the bottom of themselves, and then decide to love again anyway. To have every reason to close the door, every scar telling you to close it, every memory screaming at you to close it, and to leave it open instead. That's the bravest thing there is. Most people never manage it. Most people get hurt once and spend the rest of their lives building the wall higher. You didn't. You got hurt worse than almost anyone I've ever met, betrayed by your own blood, and you chose to stay open. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Alexander was quiet for a long time. "I only stayed open because of you," he said finally. "No," said Claire, and her voice was firm. "That's the wall talking again, just wearing a nicer suit. You didn't stay open because of me. You stayed open because you decided to. I couldn't have made that choice for you. Nobody can make it for anybody." I opened a door. You're the one who walked through it, and you're the one who has to keep it open every single day for the rest of your life, because that's the other thing nobody tells you. She looked at him steadily. Love isn't a thing you feel once, and then you have it forever, like a trophy on a shelf. Love is a choice you make again every morning. Every morning you wake up and the fear is still there, the fear of losing what you have, and every morning you have to choose to love anyway, in spite of the fear, because of the fear. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a human being ever does. And you have to do it again tomorrow, and the day after, forever. And this is the truth that the whole story has been building toward, the thing worth carrying with you long after you have forgotten the chess match and the fire and the betrayal. We are all told from the time we are young that love is soft and strength is hard. We are told that the people who guard their hearts are wise and the people who give them away are foolish. We are told to protect ourselves, to keep something in reserve, to never let anyone see all the way in, because the world is dangerous, and people will hurt you, and the only safe heart is a heart that no one holds. And this teaching sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the hard-won lesson of people who have lived and suffered and learned, but it is a lie. It is the oldest and most seductive lie there is, and it has ruined more lives than any war, because a guarded heart does not stay safe. It stays empty, and an empty heart is not protected from suffering. It is simply suffering alone, in the dark, behind a wall, with no one to hold its hand. The people in this story who tried to be strong by being hard all lost everything. And the two people who dared to be strong by being soft, by staying open, by loving in a world that gave them every reason not to, those two people won. Not because they were lucky, not because the danger passed them by. The danger came straight for them, harder than for anyone. They won because their openness turned out to be the only real strength there is. A 9-year-old boy pressed a button because a woman had loved him enough to teach him he was brave. A war ended because a man loved his wife enough to choose mercy over vengeance. An old woman's evil plan collapsed because, at the last moment, watching love in action, even her stone heart cracked open just enough to hesitate. Love did all of that. Not fear, not power, not walls, love. So if you have lived long enough to have loved and lost, and if some part of you has quietly closed a door you swore you would never open again, this story is asking you to consider something. It is asking you to consider that the wall you built to keep from being hurt again is the same wall keeping out every good thing that is still trying to reach you. It is asking you to consider that it is not too late, that the door can be opened again, that the trembling you feel at the thought of it is not a warning to stay away, but the surest sign that there is still something alive in you worth trusting. Claire Bennett walked into a ballroom with an old chessboard and no reason on earth to believe her life was about to change. She had every reason to guard her heart. She had been underestimated and overlooked her whole life, and she chose again and again at every turn to stay open, to love the children who might leave, to trust the dangerous man who told her the truth, to close the door of escape with her own hand and stand and fight for something instead of running to somewhere safe. She was not fearless. That is the thing to remember. She was afraid the entire time. She was afraid at the gala, afraid at the dinner, afraid in the room full of broken glass, afraid in the compound with a gun pointed at her heart. But she had learned the secret that separates the people who truly live from the people who only survive. She had learned that the scared feeling and the ready feeling feel exactly the same in your body. And so every single time she decided it was the ready one. That is the whole of it. That is everything this story has to give you. The heart was built to be given away. It does not work any other way. It rusts when you hoard it, and it comes alive when you spend it. And yes, it will be broken. Everyone's is, eventually, one way or another. But a broken heart that loved fully is worth 1,000 whole hearts that never dared. The broken heart has lived. The guarded heart has only waited. Alexander Romano spent 40 years with a whole, guarded, empty heart, and he called it strength, and it was the loneliest strength in the world. And then a woman broke it open in 12 moves, and for the first time in his life, he had something that could be shattered, and he discovered that this, exactly this, was what it had always meant to be alive. Their story began with a checkmate. It was never really about the game. The board was only ever a way for two frightened people to find each other across a crowded room and recognize, in the way the other one thought and fought and refused to quit, a heart worth the terrible risk of loving. And in the end, after all of it, the lesson stands as simple and as hard as it has always been. Do not build the wall. Or if you have already built it, brick by brick, over long years of being hurt, then find the courage to take it down again, one stone at a time, and stand in the open doorway with your heart exposed to whatever comes. Because the strongest person in any room is never the one who feels no fear, and never the one everybody fears. It is, and it always will be, the one brave enough to love anyway.